I'm learning to really embrace my strengths. I love learning about my clients' character strengths. I find that when I access my own and I bring them online, things get so much more smooth for me. And when I can work with the ADHD and not against it and thinking, oh, I should be able to do this. I should, then I'm much more at peace because it goes back again to that internal peace for me.
Thomas Edison, Richard Branson, John F. Kennedy, Mozart, Michael Jordan, Will Smith. That sounds like a list of highly successful titans in a variety of vocations. Why is it that we rarely hear that they have or had ADHD? And you know what we hear even less about? Serena Williams, Emma Watson, Mel Robbins, Whoopi Goldberg, Agatha Christie, Erin Brockovich, Cher. Yeah, the successful women navigating ADHD. And that's exactly why I started this podcast, ADHD for Smartass Women. I'm your host, Tracy Otsuka. I'm a lawyer, not a doctor, a lifelong student, now a coach. I'm also the creator of Your ADHD Brain is A-OK, a system that helps people like you figure out what they should do with their life. And we're here today to talk ADHD, your strengths, your symptoms, your workarounds, and how you proudly stand out instead of trying to fit in. I credit my ADHD for some of my greatest gifts. And you know what? I spy a happier life for you too. So without further ado, a shiny new episode is starting now. Hello, I am your host, Tracy Otsuka. Thank you so much for joining me here for episode number 175 of ADHD for Smartass Women. I hope that you'll subscribe to this podcast and our newsletter over at tracyotsuka.com. You know, my purpose is always to show you who you are and then inspire you to be it. And in the thousands of ADHD women that I've had the privilege of meeting, I've never met a one that wasn't truly brilliant at something. So for that reason, I am just delighted to introduce you to Leslie Robbins. Leslie is an ADHD coach who started down this path because her two oldest sons have ADHD, and she wanted to be the resource to others that she had dreamed of having when her boys were younger. I totally get that, Leslie. It wasn't until her oldest son was in college and her middle son was a junior in high school that she even discovered what ADHD coaching was. That's also when she received her own ADHD diagnoses at 47. Leslie gives workshops on ADHD to local schools, parent groups, and other businesses, including the Chamber of Commerce in Bellevue, Tennessee. In a previous life, she worked as a fundraiser, served on the board of the Officers' Wives Club. Served on the board of the Officers' Wives Club and volunteered in a variety of capacities at her son's schools, where she served on the Parent Association as president. She lives outside of Nashville, Tennessee, with her husband, Justin, and her three boys, Jack, Luke, and JT. She also believes that her boxer, whose name is Bronco, also has ADHD. And when she's not coaching and volunteering, Leslie enjoys spending time at her farm with her family and their cows, chickens, honeybees, and orchard. She loves hiking, kayaking, traveling, being outside in nature. So Leslie, welcome. And did I get all of that right?
You did. You did. Thank you for having me so much.
Absolutely. And what our listeners don't know is we have a really funny story to share, which is why I invited you here. But you're going to have to wait until we get to that part in the podcast. And it is super funny. It's absolutely why I decided, oh my gosh, we need to have her on this podcast. So my big question for you, Leslie, is I really have a problem with sitting on boards and being in meetings. That is one of my ADHD traits. And I am curious, you've been doing this, it sounds like, for decades, and it sounds like you're really good at it. You have no problem with boards and meetings?
Well, what I tend to notice, it's funny that you say that.
Uh-huh.
I don't really have problems with meetings, but I find when I'm involved, actively involved in them, whether it be running them or doing something, I'm more engaged. That may be why I kind of gravitated to some more of those leadership roles. As you say
Mm,
that, I'm thinking about that. Yeah.
absolutely. If we're just born to lead generally, and I think
Yeah.
it's hard for us not to lead. So I find that in those situations, I can be really irritating, especially to the current leader,
Yeah.
because it's just like, oh my gosh, we could get through this literally in a third of the time. I have places to be, I have things to do, and it just frustrates me. I just want to get into action. I don't want to talk about getting into action.
Right, right. And I think one of the boards that I was on previously, but there was not really an agenda. There were no job descriptions for any of the board members. There were no bylaws. And the meetings would last 2 to 3 hours. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I can't do this. And I just kind of initiated the job description thing on my own and the bylaws and some of those other things and put them into place. And thankfully, after that, we were able to kind of get in and out in an hour or so. So you're right.
Yeah. And I'm
Yeah.
sure all of the members were probably happy about that.
Yeah. Yeah. It was a big relief for
Oh,
everybody.
so, Leslie, as you know, I love to talk about the ADHD diagnoses. Everyone's story is so different. And I think our listeners really like hearing that too. I was just talking to a guest on my podcast yesterday, and she was saying she never gets sick of it because everyone's story is so different and she gets something from every single one, something different from every single one. So I want to know, what is your ADHD diagnosis story? So what happened?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I just was bebopping along, never thought I had anything going on with me. And, came upon the time I had kids. I have 3 boys. My 2 older sons were diagnosed with ADHD, and I still didn't quite understand how their brains were working. They're more of the combined type. My middle son is more, I would say, more inattentive. And I still just couldn't quite figure it out. It wasn't until my middle son, was a junior in high school, and we were seeing somebody who was helping him. And he looked at me and said, "So who has ADHD? Is it you or your husband?" And I was like, "Well, it's not me." And it wasn't my husband either. He's much more together than I am. But I was like, huh, that's an interesting question that nobody's ever asked me before. And I sat
Did you
like,
know that
no.
it was genetic?
I mean, I don't know if I was even putting it together. I knew it had to be, but even at that time, I couldn't connect the dots. Like, where was it coming from? I didn't know. I mean, there were traits I could see on both sides of the family in certain areas, that kind of thing. But I didn't know if those were just personality traits or if there was true ADHD there. Certainly never thought it was me. And once I got into this whole, like when I was going into my coach training, and the more I was learning about the inattentive ADHD and what that meant for women and girls, I was like, oh, wow. This is
Yeah.
really sounding very familiar. And that's when I went and just talked with a psychiatrist who specialized in ADHD. And that was part of some of the issue, is that, we went to our pediatrician. He was great. He did what he could for my boys, but he even said, this is not my area of expertise, and let's find you someone for them who knows more. And so when it came down to me wanting to know more, I chose that route for myself too. I went to somebody who specialized in it. And once I got some of that affirmation, I started looking back on my childhood. Where
Mhm.
could some of this have popped up? And I realized, like, I can remember having test anxiety in the first grade. My mom would say, "Okay, we are not missing school on Fridays anymore." She would say I would like have stomach aches. I would physically get sick. And I didn't remember that until she told me, like, she reminded me that. And she started forcing me to go to school and take those spelling tests. And so it kind of maybe there were some subtle teaser, way back then. I was good in spelling. I was good in writing. Math was an issue for me. And I tended to avoid procrastinated on anything that had to do with math and numbers and dates and like any of that working memory that you needed to hold on to that type of information. And I even chose my college major based on how few math classes I had to
Yeah.
take. And so I was leaning into where my strengths were, and I was avoiding my weaknesses. So I think that was part of why I never noticed it, impacting me probably until my kids were actually young and things were harder for me to manage. And I think I also coped with perfectionism and there was definitely some procrastination and avoidance when it came to things that were just difficult.
So, when you were younger, did your symptoms present more as hyperactive combined type or inattentive?
Oh, I would say inattentive. I didn't feel like I was impulsive. I was kind of a rule follower,
Mm-hmm.
not to the point, where it was rigid or it got in the way, but I needed that internal peace. If I felt like I wasn't following the rules or, pleasing my, teachers or my parents or that kind of thing, it didn't sit well with me.
So, you were a people pleaser.
I was. Yeah. Yeah.
So, what has changed since you were diagnosed?
Oh, well, it's
Everything?
everything. Well, and it's really, really funny too, because it was, I can't remember if this was right after my diagnosis or if it was maybe right before it, but my husband and I were at dinner and know that this was in complete support and love. And there was some humor involved in this as well. We were talking about some things and some events that we had coming up. And I was telling him, oh, it's on this date at this time. And he's like, are you sure? And I said, yeah, I know it's that time. And he's like, okay, you realize I need you to check your calendar. And I said, what? And then he says, I don't do anything unless I double check the calendar after you've given me a date and a time because it's always wrong. And I'm like, no, it's not. And he goes, you don't know how long I've been compensating for you. And I died laughing. I'm like, really? Well, I think I've compensated for you too. He's like, oh, I'm sure you have. But we were laughing about it. And then I was like, holy cow, he is so right. On that particular instant, I think I was right. But looking back, I'm like, I triple book myself all the time. And it's that working memory. It's that holding on to dates. It's that kind of thing. So I'm really slow to commit to like doing something now. I will triple check myself to make sure everything's lining up. I still make mistakes there too. And so I'm learning to really embrace my strengths. I love learning about my clients' character strengths. I find that when I access my own and I bring them online, things get so much more smooth for me. And when I can work with the ADHD and not against it and thinking, oh, I should be able to do this. I should, then I'm much more at peace because it goes back again to that internal peace for me.
So tell me, you mentioned that, even starting in the first grade, you had all this test anxiety. You were inattentive in school. Like, how did it present throughout the rest of your life? Like when you ended up going from high school to your first year in college, and then from, college to that first job, and then from, the job to marriage to the kids, like all of that. I'm just curious how it all played out.
Yeah.
Because based on what I read about you, it sounds like there is or was some RSD. And so I'm curious where that happened.
Yeah. I can't pinpoint the RSD. And that's what's so confusing. But there was always like this fear of failure. And so whether it was perceived fear of failure and it was my own, like, if it was just me kind of creating that RSD, that rejection sensitive dysphoria around what I had, like my own expectations. I don't know if that's when it started. I moved a lot too. That was another reason why I don't think I picked up on it, because every couple of years I was at a new school and it was exciting and I was making new friends. And then, I would bounce around. And so I was engaged for a long time. When I was in middle school and I transitioned from elementary to middle school, that's when the math thing came. Man, it came to a screeching halt. Maybe a little bit in elementary. I can remember like fourth grade in fractions. It was just too much. But I got caught back up and then hit algebra and then hit another brick wall. Found some strengths in high school, and writing again was something that I loved. And I did the best I could in chemistry and math, but man, that math was just really, I struggled there. And that's why I was like, forget it. This is not worth my stress and anxiety. When I go to college, 2 math classes, whatever is the least amount, that's the major for me. Because my dad would get frustrated. He would try to help me, but he was getting frustrated. Like, why aren't you getting this? And
was he good at math?
He was really good at math.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
had the same experience.
Yeah. And I was like, gosh, I don't know. I just don't remember. Feel like I have it and I understand it when I'm in the class, and then I come home, it's gone. I don't remember anything. So it was very frustrating to me because I always felt like I was a good student. So when I went to college, I was like, nope, I'm going to lean into where I know I'm good at. And that was supportive of me. And so I think that sustained me for a while. Then when we got married, we had kids probably 5 years into our marriage. And I was really involved in fundraising and a little bit of PR. My degree was in PR, which kind of leaned into when like I would start worrying, which is another kind of one of those where I'd kind of sit and think and kind of spin on some thoughts. um,
Yeah.
that led me to a major in public relations where I could just prevent all this stuff from happening. This would be so fantastic. um, which probably exacerbated some things for me in that area as well. But my husband was a Navy officer, and our first assignment was over in Japan. And that's when that worry got really, really intense. Not because of it was the earthquakes, the potential for the earthquakes. And I've not ever experienced one. I live in the Southeast.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, what ifing every single day? What if he's over here and I'm with my son over here and there's, I can't get to where I need to be and I don't have my passports and I can't get home and what happens? And, and I would stay up at night spinning on this stuff.
Wow.
Yeah. And so that's when the worry started coming in, I think, and having to juggle, responsibilities around my children and their needs. And then finding out that they also were struggling with some things, I'd give them like, I need you to, give them a list of things to do and expect them to do it. And they could get the first thing done and forget 2 and 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And I'm like, what's going on? Yeah. And so that's when I noticed, it just was harder for me to manage. I became more frustrated. I started really leaning into perfectionism and some rigidity in how things need to be done. And I'm sure that was stressing them out a lot too.
Yeah. Yeah. But it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
If you're worried about these things and that's all you're focusing on, guess what? The worry's growing bigger, 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 right? Because you didn't
Right.
have the skills to stop that worrying.
No. And that's what everyone would say. Well, just don't worry about it. I'm like, what do you mean? Like,
How
if
do
that
you
was
do
not
that?
how do you know? I know I couldn't do it. That was concerning to me at that time. Yeah.
Okay. So we're going to talk about why you're here.
Yeah.
Well, no. We're going to talk about what brought you here.
Okay. Yes.
And I think the best way to do that is for you to tell the story. So just a little bit of background. I think we met through Dana, right? Is
Yes.
that where? Okay. So Dana she heads up what's her title? Like she's the head of training, right? For ADCA, which is the ADD Coaching Academy. And she is wonderful. I love her. And she specializes in ADHD and autism.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she's just
Yeah.
brilliant in that area. But I think most of her work now is just running all the coach training at ADCA. So tell me the story that she told you need to go share with Tracy.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh gosh. Yeah. Well, and Dana's my mentor coach too. And so I work with her and she's been such a, blessing.
Yeah,
And
great choice.
yeah. And she's coaching as well too. But yeah. So I, back in this February, I was trying to get my website, like some things going on my website and some social media stuff. And well, actually, I'll go back. It was it was the first of February. I posted something and it said, I decided that my 2022 was going to start February 1st. And this was a trial month. That was for January. Little did I know that a couple of days later, things were going to come to kind of a screeching halt for me. I had a period of time where I had no sleep. The electricity, for whatever reason, was going off and on in our community. They were doing some work on some power lines. And I got up to go get some coffee at a gas station just a mile away. I had my ADHD dog, Bronco, with me in the car. And
I have one too, by the way.
That's where he has it. I was pumping my gas. I never get out of my gas or my car when I'm pumping my gas. I never get out. But that morning I had to go get my coffee. And when I got my coffee, I got in the car, checked to make sure the dog was okay. I think 6 hours of sleep in a total of 48 hours. I just drove away, just completely drove away. I did not check to see if I put the gas pump back in the hole where it belonged. And I was driving down the street and I'm looking like, why are people staring at me? And I'm like, I don't even know what's going on. So I turned at the very next turn. I literally was on this little stretch of road for maybe 30 seconds, a minute, not even. And I looked out of my rearview mirror and I was like, oh, that's why everybody's staring at me. I have a gas pump hanging out of my car, dragging on the road because, I heard the noise. That's what like kind of clued me in. How I didn't hear the noise when I drove away of it disconnecting, I don't know. I was completely not paying attention. And I was like, great. How embarrassing is this? And so I was mortified and I happened to have a box, put the gas pump in the box. I'm like, okay, I thought really quick, maybe I could just take it home and throw it away. Maybe I don't. But then I was like, no, I need that back. And that wouldn't be really honest of me. And it was really, again, inner peace. I needed that inner peace. And so I put it in the box. I took it back and the gas attendant, she came out and she was just puffing and like, why would anybody do that? And I'm like, hi, that was me. Here's your pump. I gave it back. And I'm like, is it hard to fix? And she took it and she's like, no. And she plugged it back in. I was like, okay. And she didn't say anything to me. So I was like, okay, well, bye. And I left. And I was like, oh, thank goodness that's over. Well, a day later, I didn't tell anybody about it. I was just like, okay, the people who saw me do it, they saw me do it, whatever, it's over and done with. And so I get on Facebook, I'm checking it because I'm thinking about like, what am I going to post for my business page or whatever. And I'm like, oh, look at there. There's a picture of my car with the gas pump dragging on the road. And a friend of mine who I hadn't seen in 5 years shared it. What? So I texted her and I was like, hey, and the person who originally posted didn't blur my license tag out. And I thought, well, that's kind of funny. Let me just ask her if she'll blur out my license tag and then nobody will know. Well, she said, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. This is so embarrassing. I'm taking it down. And I said, it's okay. You can leave it up. She's like, no. And so she took it down and she tried to contact the original poster. And she's like, I don't know who it was. And I thought, oh, great. So I clicked on the link of from her, page to see who originally posted. It had what did I say? Like 104 shares, 60 shares, 104 comments. This was less than 24 hours. And I thought, oh, great. Now I'm going to have to tell my husband about it because I hadn't told him. And so I did. And we laughed. And my 16-year-old son, neurotypical, who totally would have also taken a picture.
Yes, and posted it. Look at this idiot.
I know. And he's like, Mom, it's not that bad. And I said, oh, JT, yes, it is. It's horrible. This is awful. And he's like, no, really, it's not. He was so sweet and supportive and probably a little bit had some secondhand embarrassment for me as well. But I thought, and then I thought, oh, this is absolutely awful. Because like everybody's going to see this. I live in a smaller town outside of Nashville. They know my car. They certainly knew my license tag because it's like
you're an ADHD coach,
all that stuff. And I thought, this is just horrible. What am I going to do? And so one of the friend who posted, we were messaging back and forth, and she said, hey, well, at least you went viral. And she's like, and I said, you know what? That's what I'm going to do. I own this. And so I'm like, how am I going to own it? What do I need to do? And that's when I decided I'm going to go through all of the comments from the original poster's page and see what they said and answer their questions. But I couldn't share it back because I wasn't friends with the original poster. So I wrote an article about it instead and put it on my Facebook page or my Facebook. I linked it from my Facebook page to my website.
Yeah, no. I absolutely love that. And what was so interesting to me is that so many people could relate. So that's what I was actually really surprised because so many people were like, My life packed into one picture. Nice reminder you're not the only one struggling with life's curveballs. Did
Right.
that once. It happens more than you think. At the gas station the other day, it happened, and the employee said that they had just gotten the pump replaced for the third time in 6
Yes,
weeks.
yes,
I
yes.
would laugh, but I've done it twice. I've done that at the same gas station. Luckily, I heard it yank before it actually came out. I mean, they were so incredibly supportive.
They
What
were.
I love most, though, is that you literally took that situation, which, oh my gosh, like you're viral with your license plate,
Yes.
your car with the gas tank, pump thing hanging out of it. You could have been just mortified, let RSD get the best of you, right?
Yes,
But
totally.
but instead you totally did the opposite, which is, I think it's kind of like the fourth stage of gratitude, where you were like, okay, this happened for me. What can I do with it to make it life's best lesson, not just for me, but for other people? And so you went back and you answered every single question, but you were teaching them about ADHD in the way you answered the question.
Yes, yes, yes. Yeah. Yeah, there was one person who said, "Oh, it looks like an end of a 3 days of long 12-hour shifts. I can see it." And my response was, "Oh, you're closed. In the past 48 hours, I had 6 hours of sleep." And then I mentioned about sleep deprivation, that many people
Mhm.
with ADHD have, trouble with sleep. And I, in fact, had that, that day, and broke out some statistics on each little component that I wanted it to be a teachable moment, and it was actually fun to connect the research with the questions.
No, I think it's a brilliant article. We will definitely link to it. And I just, I love the actions that you took that showed that there is no such thing as bad. Nothing is bad, right? It's a choice that we call it bad.
You're so right. Yes. And I'll say that to my clients, my children, friends, like how you choose to navigate in your world, it's a choice. And the only thing you can choose is how you want to react to something. Things happen, but we can be at choice with our response. And it's so true. But had it not been for my own personal work and my own coaching that I've had and my training as well, I would not have been able to shift. And it literally was like within 30 minutes, I was feeling like sick to my stomach with embarrassment. And I was like, no, I'm going to take control of this. Like I said, I love character strengths and I love leaning into those. And immediately that came to me like, what do I need to use? How do my core strengths fit into this? And there's a test that I use with all of my clients. I've done it with my family and friends too. And it's the VIA character strength, a scientific test, and anybody can take it for free at viacharacter.org. And I really lean into those on a very, if not daily basis, certainly weekly basis. But courage was not one of my strengths. And I'm like, okay, I've got to dig down deep and find it
But
because
was humor?
no, it wasn't, which is so
Humor's
funny.
not. Oh, I thought for sure just the way you responded to the comments.
Yeah, and that's what surprised me, is that how those kind of came up from,
Maybe it's a basic strength, Leslie.
yeah, I think it is, and it's been interesting to kind of reflect on how those kind of rose to the top. My top ones, is it okay if I share those just to kind of
Yeah, I
perspective?
love the
Um,
bio character strengths test.
so my top one, I have like 8 of my top 8. So appreciation for beauty and excellence, prudence, which at first I hated, but now I love, spirituality, leadership, kindness, love, gratitude, and fairness.
Yeah.
And those had to all come online. Like I didn't think it was fair that mine got, exposed like that. So I felt
Mhm.
kind of like, I don't know, some of my values and some of my needs and all that stuff, they were all out of whack with this whole situation. But I was like, no, 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 no. If I can take control of this, that's that leadership. I can be grateful for what this can maybe bring to me. Like I really used those. And once I did, I think that's when the humor came and the courage. But I also know that with ADHD, you can't shake your finger at somebody and say, oh, well, you shouldn't have done this. You
Yeah.
know, she thought it was funny, whoever this person was that posted it. It was funny. And I thought it was funny in the moment. And so I'm like, there's no way I'm going to, like, go at it from that angle, because that doesn't serve anybody. And that's where I was like, okay, how can this be fun and funny and maybe somebody can learn something from it along the way.
Yeah. So let me just explain for those who don't know what the VIA character strengths test is. So you take this test, and then there's 24 character strengths.
Yes.
We have every single one of those character strengths, but we have them in varying degrees. So Leslie may have leadership in her top character strengths, and I may have humor, and leadership is way down. But just because leadership is way down does not mean that I can't lead. It's just that I don't need to lead to be happy. And is there another word, Leslie, that I should be using, to be operating at my optimum?
Yeah. Or like living in integrity with yourself.
Yes, that's perfect. And so then there's also something called our signature character strengths. And those are the character strengths that we rely on all the time. And we cannot go through life without exhibiting those character strengths, without using those character strengths, because they're as natural to us as breathing. So those are the very top character strengths. But then there's phasic strengths, which can be at the very bottom, but we use them at times when there's crisis. Or can you explain it better?
Yeah, I think they rise to the top when you,
right.
Yeah. And I also feel like when you have your core strengths and you're in alignment with those, and you're not overusing them or underusing them. And I may be wrong about this, so I'll have to go back and look at my learning and my research. But when some of those strengths, those lesser strengths that you don't tap into, can really come to the top.
Correct.
Yeah.
For example, well, actually, that wasn't an example. I was just thinking of, like a character strength of prudence, which would never be on my list of character strengths. And I think what happens to us is, because many of us tend to be impulsive, we beat ourselves up about the fact that we are impulsive and we should be more prudent, right? Rather than leaning into the fact that, no, but we're impulsive. So let's make impulsivity work for us. I agree there is a balance. I tend to be more, screw the weaknesses, hire those out, do what you can in order to, get through life and do the things, that thing that you want to do, and really, really focus on the weaknesses. But that's kind of my strategy. And so those phasic strengths, especially for those of us with ADHD, we can actually be really prudent in some situations, or we can be really, what are some character strengths that are typically not ADHD character strengths?
Self-regulation is one.
Yeah, exactly. We can be super self-regulated when things are intense enough, right? Like in a crisis.
Right.
So those become phasic strengths, where they rise, they can rise to the top in instances where all the other elements are working.
Yeah. And I know a lot of people who feel like love of learning, that's another strength.
Yeah.
That's not one of theirs. But when it's of something that they're interested in, or they're, it's novel, or it's kind of stands out and jumps out, they want to learn everything they can about it. And so I know that surprises some of my clients too, about how that one shows up for them.
Yeah. I have to say, when I think of all the ADHD women I've worked with, I have never met one, I don't think, that has, either curiosity or love of learning. And I kind of see those as very similar. But as you said, it's in their area of interest. See, all the other stuff, it's like, forget it. I don't care.
Right. Yeah. And I think, as I'm talking about this, that prudence thing was so huge for me, because I could have just been mad and just spout it off. Like, how could you, why did you
dare you?
Whatever. And I got into, a Facebook war, and who wants that? And that, again, inner peace, and needed to have it. But so I leaned into that. I'm like, okay, what would be the best way to handle this? And it created that pause that I needed. And I'm grateful for that, and maybe because that is a core strength that I can lean into, that it does put that impulsivity at bay for me. It could be present, I'm sure, in some situations.
So are you inattentive primarily?
Yes, primarily.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which is, I guess, pretty common. If you're inattentive as a child, I think that just kind of follows you.
Yeah, that's what I've been reading the research on that, and that seems to be the case. Yeah.
Although I really wonder, I think that we are all hyperactive. It's just, are you hyperactive in body or are you hyperactive in mind? So I don't.
And I totally agree with you there, because there's definitely a lot of cognitive hyperactivity that I experience myself. And I didn't, again, going back to the resource that we had that was helping my middle son when he was asking me, so, who has ADHD? Is it you or your husband? So he was talking about, like, how busy is your brain? Like, what are you thinking about? Is it ever still? Have you ever meditated? And I thought, oh no, I couldn't do that.
Can you meditate?
Right. And of course my son was like, no, I'm not doing that. And he said, he described it like, thoughts are like clouds just kind of moving by. Have you ever sat and just noticed how many thoughts that you have in a period of time? And I thought, I don't think I've ever done that, but I didn't think I had that many. And it was probably, I don't know, maybe a year or two after that. And one day, I guess it was one of those days where there's white puffy clouds in the sky, nice blue sky in the back. And I was noticing go by and I thought, okay, I'm going to try that. I'm just going to notice. And I was like, holy cow, it's not stopping.
Yeah.
There were a lot. Yeah. So that's where mine is the cognitive hyperactivity.
I think I recall reading that we have 60,000 thoughts a day, which is insanity to me.
Right. Right. And then, you can get attached to a thought and start spinning on it without even realizing that you're spinning on it. And I say that negatively, because that positivity ratio is, it's 3-1. And if you're focusing on that negativity, like way back in the back, you can all of a sudden start feeling irritated and frustrated and annoyed. And you're like, where did this come from? I don't even know why I'm annoyed. And it's because you kind of thought about something and you're going about your day, but there's still that thought looming in the background. And until I started paying attention to it, I didn't realize that I was even doing some of that. And that's been really eye-opening to me, because now I can say, okay, I can take a positive interrupt. I can, distract myself in a way that will support me and get away from that negative thinking so that I can move forward in a way that'll support me. And that's what I help, try to help some of my clients do as well.
So Leslie, does that happen to you where all of a sudden you realize that you're really irritated about something, but you don't even know what it is? So you have to pause and kind of, sit down or whatever and really kind of think through what it could be?
Yeah, I have to trace it back. And I never noticed it before, until, it's all, I think our body tells us, like, how we're feeling before our brains. Yep. And so why are my shoulders up at my ears? Like, what am I so tense about? Like, why is my neck, tight, or I'm clenching my teeth, or, that's kind of where I tend to hold stress and tension. And then I'll start thinking, okay, what grabbed my attention? Which one of those little thought clouds that went by in my brain did I grab onto and kind of, and not let it just keep on going? And I can almost trace it back. Just when I'm intentional about it, I can trace it back every time. Yeah, but it's practice. And it took, it was probably, I was well into my coach training before I even was doing it for myself.
Yeah, I think what happens for me is I literally forget what I'm upset about. And as you said, your body doesn't. So if you just kind of, no pausing, no nothing, just keep blowing through life, which is what I typically do, I forget that I'm upset. I mean, I joke all the time, you can do anything to me because, in an hour I won't remember.
Right. That's like a great gift, right? That's a blessing.
Exactly. It is. Sometimes.
Sometimes, right.
Okay. So anyway, I did a little bit of research about this and I was laughing even more. And when I say about this, about, people who drive off with the hose stuck in the gas tank. Yeah. And apparently what there is a breakaway coupling that will detach from the hose from the pump and automatically shut off the flow of fuel when the coupling is detached. So I guess that's why when you brought the pump back, they just stuck it right back in.
Yeah.
Because it happens so much. And I saw someone on Quora wrote, chances are the worst that will happen is you'll be stopped by the police and quite probably be given a sobriety test. Take your time and don't be that guy. And then someone else responded with a photo of a
Oh,
police car with the hose and the nozzle attached, driving down the freeway, just like the photo that was taken of you.
oh, it can happen to all of us.
Can you imagine being a police officer?
Well, you know, probably because I've done it. But
Exactly. And
poor
I
guy.
think many police officers are ADHD, right? It's the perfect career.
It is because it's intense. They can hyper
Yeah,
focus. They can bring all of those ADHD, like the things that you can really lean into, that being
right,
able to react quickly, all that. Yeah, yeah. And something as mundane as pumping gas, especially on a long shift if he was tired, totally could
right.
see how it happened.
Oh my gosh. So, Leslie, what is it about you and your ADHD that makes you good at what you do?
Well, I think I've had to kind of step back and like look at what gets in my way and just really acknowledge that. I've had conversations with my own son, and he's been really great about being able to do that as well over the years. And when I can shift my perspective, when I can reframe and lean into my strengths, I feel like that's when I can give myself grace and compassion for some of the things that create hurdles for me. And so I think like when I can hyper focus and get into that flow, oh, like I love that. But I have to be careful because it can pull me away from family time. It can pull me away from, it can make me run late. I can be like, oh, just one more thing, just one more thing. I'm in the flow. I don't want to stop. So that transitioning is hard, but I do love the hyper focus piece because it is so satisfying, and I can get some things done with that. And I have to lean into what supports me, with the working memory piece and with the numbers. And so I have to bring on some outside scaffolding to support me. And when I can do that, then, it's less of an obstacle. I don't know if that answers that question or not.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, can I ask you, are you now grateful for the fact that the gas pump thing happened?
Oh my gosh, yes. Yes. And when I'm in a bad mood, like before it totally put me in a bad mood, all I have to do is like look at that picture, and I
Yes.
will laugh out loud if I'm the only person like in my house. And so, yeah, it gives me it kind of it makes me laugh. It brings me joy, gratitude.
I
Yeah.
would think too, it would be the best reminder. So if you have that picture like on your desk, right, of
Yeah.
any kind of barriers that you encounter or anything that happens that is quote unquote bad, just the reframe, right?
Just the reframe. Just the reframe. Yeah, I mean, I was talking with a client the other day, and she gave me permission to share this. We had a session, and she had called, and she was inquiring on how to support her son, who also has ADHD, and she does as well. And there was a situation going on, like not a situation, but it was like an event that was happening, and he was wanting to ask a girl to come with him to an event, and she's scaffolding him because this is his first experience with all of this, which is great. But there was some issues where there wasn't some communication that was coming back. So he was putting some things out there, and then it was silent. And so
Mm.
she's like, oh my gosh, she was worried about it. And I said, well, if there's one thing, what is your takeaway? Because we had kind of we were coaching via text even, because she was trying to support him and try to keep herself regulated so she wouldn't stress her son out, and so she
Mhm.
could support him. And I said, well, there are lots of possibilities, and our brains have to have meaning to the things that we don't understand. And our brain will help us out and
Yeah.
give us a meaning. But we have to filter that and decide, is that true? Is there evidence of this? And if it's not, if there's no evidence of it, ask ourselves what could be true. And lots of things could be true. And we could come up with 1,000 different reasons why things could be going on. But because the negative thoughts and just negativity in general sits with us longer, it's heavier, it's longer to process that cortisol and adrenaline through our system, it lingers. She was able to say, I gave her some other possible scenarios. And and she's like, you're right. This helped me from spiraling downward into the black hole of rumination and infinite meaning making, she said. And so she was able to see what else was possible. I'm trying to think of what else she said. She said scenarios of positive opposites. We talked about that. And And the critical question, what is my tangible evidence for building these towers of terror? And she
Yeah.
didn't have any. And so it was just a complete shift for her.
Well, and especially if she then goes and shares that with her son.
Yeah. Yeah. And then she can apply that. She's like, oh, this, she started connecting it with other areas of her life where we can just worry and we can get into that place of where we spin and we worry and we what if, and it's not helping us move forward. And sometimes it could just completely make us totally stuck. When it got down to it and they figured out what was going on, there was some glitching in the phones, and that's why the communication wasn't going through.
So did it work out for him?
Yes, it did. And it was great. It was great.
What a great lesson for her to then apply next time.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was a great story and an experience to anchor it. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a great story. So what do you think the key to living successfully with ADHD is?
I think acknowledging where it gets in the way. I think we have to get to a place where we accept it. I know many times, especially with students and young people, we just want to be like everybody else. We just want to be normal, whatever normal is. And when we can acknowledge that, okay, this is just, my brain is different. I tell my son, he's a car guy, and I said, you know what, you have we hear the sports car brain and the bicycle brakes. I said, but you really, really and truly have. You are a sports engine. You are a sports car. You are high performance. You require special tires, special fuel, special, you have to have the oil check. You got to check your systems. You got to make sure, you got to go into the pit, and you got to check on things before you can get back out there again. So when things fall off the track, we've got to do our systems check. And when we can acknowledge what we need and what supports us, then we can go out and we can own the ADHD, be great examples to other people who have ADHD. And there's so many people out there, like you say in the beginning of your podcast, there's so many people who do so many amazing, extraordinary things who have ADHD. But, being able to model that for others, I don't know. I mean, I think that's powerful.
I love that answer. I would not trade my brain for any other brain. Although I was tested again recently and my working memory isn't even bad. It's certainly for my age and all that. So a lot of it is the stories that we tell ourselves, right? I've been going around for decades. Oh my God, my memory's terrible. I can't memorize songs. I can't do this. I can't do that. And I realized that, well, it's about interest. I'm not interested in memorizing those things, but the things I'm interested in, yeah, I'll remember them.
Yeah. And what we pay attention to grows.
Yep. Totally.
Good or bad. So, good or bad.
Right. So let's focus on the good, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if we have a choice, going back to choice, right. What supports
we
us?
always have a choice. I mean, honestly, I can't think of one thing that would be really bad that there isn't something that you can learn from it. Yes. That there isn't something that could build a strength or, so on and so forth. So, yes. Okay. What is your number one workaround? Do you have one?
Oh, lots and lots of lists, but I'm learning that I'm having to break my lists out. I have to have categories for those. I can't go through my day without them. And timers, but not timers to remind me to stop, timers to help me get into an action.
Yep.
3, 2, 1, go. That kind of a thing. Mm-hmm. And then I can, when I'm having trouble getting started, that can help me do that. I'm visual and I'm a verbal processor too. And so if I lean into those strategies of helping me remember things, then that supports me as well.
And just getting into action, right?
Yeah.
Because once we're in action, then there's no problem continuing.
Right.
There's a problem stopping.
Exactly.
So Leslie, are you working on something that you want to tell us about?
I am working on something. I have done a little bit of research and I have leaned into Barbara Fredrickson's work on positivity. And I just love it so much. She wrote the book Positivity. And, one of the things that with, those of us with ADHD, we tend to forget the things that we do that are, that bring us joy and pride and our successes, basically. And so I'm pulling together some things on bringing in the positivity and being able to recognize the strengths. And I've done it a couple of times with some friends, and I call it kind of a positivity power hour.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm working on it to create a workshop around it. And so hopefully, I don't know, maybe by the summer, I'll have some of those details laid out on how that will work and be able to open that up. So just check my website to see when that is coming available. It's really wonderful when people see, what they are in abundance of from a standpoint of positivity and where the scarcity is and what they want more of.
Right. Again, if we're whatever wherever our attention goes, that's where our results go.
Mm-hmm.
So where can people find you if they want to know more about this, and they should go to your website?
They can go to my website, LeslieRobbinsCoaching.com, and that's Robbins with 2 B's, all strung together. And they can email me at leslie.robbins.adhdcoach@gmail.com. But through my website, you can schedule a consultation with me, and I offer free consultations for anyone who's wanting to explore, coaching, or to see if it's, if we're a right fit for one another, or just have questions. I'm happy to talk with you.
Wonderful. So it's LeslieRobbinsCoaching.com, and it's LESLIE.
Yes.
ROBBINS coaching.com.
Correct.
Okay. And all of this, including the email, will be in the show notes. Leslie,
yes.
Thank you so much for spending time with us here today. Look, I would have never met you had you not driven off with the gas hose in your car.
It continues to bless me. Thank you.
Exactly. So thank you so much for coming and talking to us about it.
Oh, thank you for having me. Thank you so much. It was fun to talk about, and I'm very grateful.
So that's what I have for you for this week. If you like this episode with Leslie Robbins, please let us know by leaving a review. Our goal is to change the conversation around ADHD, helping as many women as we possibly can learn how their ADHD brains work so that they too may discover their amazing strengths. And you know what? Your reviews really do help in that regard. As always, you're listening to ADHD for Smartass Women. Come join me over at tracyoutsuka.com. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you here next week. You've been listening to the ADHD for Smartass Women podcast. I'm your host, Tracy Outsuka, and we're available on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Not coincidentally, ADHD for Smartass Women, it's also the name of our free Facebook group. We're a totally smartass community of successful, ambitious women who share our ADHD wins, questions, and workarounds. Join us at tracyoutsuka.com, where you can also find more information on our Your ADHD Brain is A-OK system. I spy a happier life for us, and I'll see you again next week.